Hello, everyone, and welcome to our third edition of PDN Live. My name is Shannon Salyer, and I'll be your moderator tonight. Our topic tonight is self-defense firearms training and practice, and with me, of course, I have Rob Pincus, Executive Director of PDN, owner of IC Training, and developer of combat-focused shooting. Our special guest tonight is Michael Seeklander, owner of Shooting Performance. And Mike, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you've got going on in your world.
I have absolutely nothing. I just lounge around and lay on the bed all day and stuff like that. So, I'm the owner of Shooting Performance LLC, as well as shooting-performance.com, and travel all over teaching classes. I've got 3 or 4 training series out on books and DVDs. I've been kind of hanging out with Rob and doing similar things, yet different, for a lot of years. I've also been competitively shooting, so a little difference there for a lot of years. Former Marine, law enforcement officer, can't hold down a job, so here I am.
Well, welcome tonight. And Rob, you've been pretty busy. Just kicked off the PDN tour. You want to tell us a little bit about what you have going on?
Yeah, of course, Executive Director of Personal Defense Network. We've been working on that brand one way or another for about a decade, since 2005, and we just kicked off the 2015 Personal Defense Network Training Tour, where I and several other contributors, including Mike, participate in classes all around the country. So this week I'm in St. Augustine, Florida, my home base, and I'm going to be driving all the way up the Pacific Northwest, finishing up with a class in Washington in mid-July, with about 30 stops in between and a lot of different industry events, providing a lot of training. Obviously, mostly firearms training is my specialty, as it is Mike's, but we've got other guys on the tour who are doing medical training, unarmed training, mindset training, addressing legal issues, addressing home defense, a lot of scenario training being done this year. So lots of good things happening with this year's Personal Defense Network Training Tour, and I'm sure we'll address some of the topics and talk more about the sponsors as the night goes on.
Awesome. For all you that are tuning in tonight, you can catch us on Facebook at facebook.com/Personal Defense Network. On Twitter, you can follow us and live chat us. Our Twitter handle is P_D_N. You can follow us on Instagram at PDN Network, and you can also follow all the action live using the hashtag PDN Live. So again, our topic is self-defense firearms training and practice. We asked for your questions ahead of time, got a lot of great ones, but if you have any, if you're tuning live and have any questions, just feel free to type them in the YouTube chat below or hit us up on Twitter, and we'll try our best to get around to them. For all of you that are listening or tuning in, we also have an awesome deal for our PDN Premium membership. It's right below in the YouTube description. Go ahead and click that and get yourself an awesome deal. Before we get started, Mike, do you have any social hashtag plugs, handles that you'd like us to follow you at?
You can find me if you search for my name on Facebook, as well as Shooting-Performance. I've got a page there, as well as the American Warrior Society. I can't accept normal friend requests, but use the business page. That's the best place. Also got a Twitter feed at Mike Seeklander. Instagram at Mike Seeklander. So I typically use my name. The other places you'll find me is Shooting-Performance.
Awesome. Well, we'll just jump right in if you guys are ready. Our first question is from Eric from Midwest Gun Safety. And one of you can kick us off with answering, but what are the fundamental concepts to control recoil and muzzle flip in subcompact handguns? How do you recommend a person to learn to shoot faster?
You're me, Rob. Me?
You're faster than I am, so you go.
Oh, how do we control? Well, first of all, when we're talking about controlling any kind of recoil on a firearm, handgun specifically, the compact, subcompact, full size, that doesn't necessarily change how we control the recoil. It may change where our hands go on the grip itself. Hold on. We can expand on this a little more if I have what I think I have here. This is a non-firing SIRT pistol made by NLT, and by the way, this is like an old one. So I can't clear it. It's a safe gun, but we're talking about controlling the recoil. I'll give you a couple tips. Was it Eric? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, Eric, number one of the best things you can do to control recoil is learn where to place your hands in the handgun. Now, granted, you probably know strong hand high, support hand high in the proper position. We want to have a lot of skin on the grip itself, but the number one thing that I think that my students probably neglect to do, and I don't know about Rob's students, is grip the handgun. So we're talking about developing your handgun grip to control recoil. The grip itself has to be something that is fundamentally solid, meaning when I'm grabbing the handgun, I'm going to squeeze the handgun. So if you think about it like a vise on a bench, you know, if you have a vise mounted to a bench that you put a piece of metal in, when I mount a vise on the bench, two things have to happen for that vise to work. Number one, I have to have it cranked down. That's your gripping pressure on the grip itself. And number two, to make sure the vise is secure, I need to make sure my tendons in my wrists, my elbows, etc. are locked. And then last but not least, and it's not really part of the two equation step, but I need to have body weight behind the gun. So I want to have as much body weight as possible behind the gun. So I always say grip, lock, get your body behind the gun as much as possible. And then once you figure out how to do that and your hands are in the right spot, don't move anything when you're doing this. And if you can master those few things, it'll make a big difference. And I tell all my students this: do one experiment when you're shooting live fire. You know, whatever you normally do, you draw and you fire 2 rounds, or just stand there and extend the gun and fire 2 rounds or 3 rounds. Do it a few times, watch what the sights do, and then do the exact same thing again, but mentally say, grip twice as hard. Grip twice as hard, extend the gun, pull the trigger twice. Grip twice as hard, extend the gun. And by doing that, you elicit a response to literally grip maybe not twice as hard, and you'll immediately see the gun flatten or the recoil be reduced. Did I answer everything? Was that it?
Well, actually, the next question from Rose kind of goes into that. How can they get beyond the pull, 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 then jerk the trigger and hit low and to the left? How can they get through that?
That sounds like a Rob Pincus touch and press question and answer.
All right. So I think for me, one of the biggest drills that we've used over the last few years is a drill we call dynamic deviation control to help people from that snap mentality that they get into. And it's not really a mentality, it's a snap phenomenon. Of course, they don't intend to do it. But one of the reasons we use this drill, and people can look up dynamic deviation control at personaldefensenetwork.com being run in one of our video clips. The way the drill works, we get people up maybe 10, 12, 15 feet, somewhere in that range. We have them get to full extension on a chest-sized target, maybe an 8x8 box, 10x10 box, 8-inch circle, something like that. And we have them actually move the gun in a circle or in a figure 8 later in the drill, all within and throughout that target. And what we're trying to do is remind the student that the gun doesn't have to be perfectly still. Right? That's an ultimate target marksmanship type concept. If we were truly going to hold the gun perfectly still, we'd be shooting 9mm size groups for practical purposes at 10 or 12 feet. And obviously, we're not even trying to do that. What we want to do is hit the chest, hit that target anywhere in our defensive training. So the gun can be allowed to move, and in fact should be allowed to move. We shouldn't be trying to hold it perfectly still in space. One of the other things that happens is there's an illusion in the training environment when we're shooting at steel or paper that the target is going to be perfectly still. And of course, in a dynamic defensive situation, that's not going to be true. The target's going to be moving. So some of the older techniques, like the push and pull, lock the gun perfectly in place, target shooting techniques that are known throughout the marksmanship world and were taught in the past in the defensive shooting world, those were designed to try to keep the gun as still as possible on a target that was obviously static as well. So if you use the more modern approach that what Mike just described, a good solid grip, full extension of both arms, shoulders engaged, body weight behind the gun, that gun is going to be moving more than it would be in an isolated push-pull kind of static environment. So we really exaggerate that by literally having the students move the gun around in a little bit of a circle and then learn to smoothly press the trigger so that they realize the gun can be moving. The gun is going to be moving a little bit. They have a good enough kinesthetic alignment or a good enough sight alignment, sight picture so that the gun can break any time now. And that's really the trick. We don't want to think of it as locking the gun into place and then saying the gun has to go off right now by staging the trigger, taking up all that slack, trying to get everything perfect, holding our breath, and then snapping. And that's the number one problem I see is people trying to make the gun go off on some specific microsecond as opposed to getting good enough alignment and then pulling the trigger smoothly, pressing the trigger smoothly so that the gun can go off anytime now. And that's really the approach. So that dynamic deviation control actually was something that was shown to me by Ken Hackathorn many, many years ago. As he used it as a preparatory drill for walking and shooting, walking towards the target or walking away. Now that isn't something we cover in our programs, but we do use that drill in a modified way to teach that smooth trigger press and not trying to make something happen instantly or hold the gun perfectly still. Mike, I don't know if you have any tricks that you can pass on also?
No, I think that was very thorough. I wouldn't add much. I just think that one of the things about the snatching that trigger, or go to snatch it, and I think you mentioned, Rob, and I don't know if you do exactly the same thing, but one of the things that I do with my students is when I have someone that's snatching the trigger, they're tending to pull the trigger in stages. I mean, they tend to pull it, at a certain place where the trigger has that, great feel, and they're like, okay, now I need to make the gun go off. Whether the sight picture is causing that, or there are a lot of different factors. So consider this: once you start the trigger movement, never stop the trigger movement if you intend to shoot. And we're not saying you can't disengage on the trigger and whatever else, but the point is, if you just learn, and literally that means, like Rob said, if the sights move, and continue to pull the trigger, you can't stop pulling the trigger. Continue the motion of the trigger. It's almost like you're pulling a revolver trigger, when you're shooting automatic. And so when you start it, don't stop it, and see if that fixes the problem.
Yeah, that's huge. That's one of the biggest reasons we use that drill. We consider it a remedial drill to help people stop that habit of staging the trigger. And staging the trigger was taught with the striker-fired guns for a long time, and I think we've evolved past it in the defensive training community, and even in the competition circles. You're much more well-versed to speak in that area than I am, but I think we've gotten away from the idea of staging the trigger and trying to turn a striker gun into a single-action gun.
Got it. So we'll shift gears for a little bit from that to flashlights. So Frank asks, when attempting to shoot with a flashlight, I'm not able to shoot with any consistency. Holding the light between the middle two fingers of my support feels like it should provide a good light on target, but I'm not able to call my shots.
Yeah, let me jump in there, and Mike this may be one of those areas where we completely disagree, but I will say that I've got this gun here that's clear. I have never seen a shooter, myself included, shoot better or have their ability to hit a target enhanced by any of the back of the hand, any of the cigar technique, any of even putting the gun, the gun here with the flashlight under the gun. I've never seen anyone shoot better that way than they actually could one-handed. So I prefer to separate the gun and the light, or of course have a light mounted on the gun as a secondary light, but I prefer to separate the light and the gun, shoot the gun one-handed, and if you're in a circumstance where you can't shoot the gun one-handed, honestly, in a personal defense situation, if you're really using a flashlight in your hand to find the person because it's so dark in that environment, you're probably going to be within the realm of your one-handed defensive shooting. If you're not, once you've found and identified the threat, especially if you have a lanyard or any kind of a loop on your flashlight, you can let go of the flashlight and go to a two-handed grip. You can drop the flashlight down and point it at the ground, as you can see where it would be here. It would be bouncing the light off the ground to still be able to illuminate enough of the target to shoot at. Or that's when you would drop this light and go to your weapon-mounted light as your secondary light, and it would become your primary. So I am not a fan of any, and I've taught them all in the past, and I learned them all, of course, in the past. I'm not a fan of any of the integrated techniques. I think they should be removed from the vernacular. We don't teach them anymore except to cover as much as I just did. And again, floor open for Mike to disagree. Or
I completely disagree. No, I'm just kidding. Hey, I have a flashlight too. No. Literally today, I'm writing a short deal for Recoil. I'll eventually put it up probably on my blog. But I completely agree. The position that I use is a modification of what we used to do a little bit at the FAMs, the Air Marshals, which was more of a cheek or a neck index. I use more of an eye indexed shooting position, but I completely deintegrate, or whatever we're calling here. I believe in a one-handed shooting technique. And the person that asked the question, if you're having inconsistency in your shooting, just remember there's really no way to control recoil. When I say no way, there are a few ways that we as competitors do it in an IDPA, and we've kind of mastered it, but it's only with specialized flashlights when we're set up for that thing. When we're talking about fighting in low light, having the ability to search, defend your head, throw strikes, and then shoot with your light is the key. So Rob handled it well. I completely agree with that. I would agree with completely eliminating two-handed techniques. And one of my fears there for my students is that when we're starting to integrate, we can't defend our head, and if we go to shoot and bring that other hand up to defend or push or whatever else, that if that trigger gets touched, we're going to end up with our hand in the way of the muzzle. And I haven't seen anybody effectively integrate fighting with shooting with a two-handed technique very well. So.
Gotcha. For all of you that are just joining us, this is PDN Live. Topic is self-defense firearms training and practice with Mike Sieklander of Shooting Performance and Rob Pincus, Executive Director of PDN. For those of you that are with us, be sure to ask questions in the comments below and also via Twitter. Our Twitter handle is P_D_N. So moving on, Matthew wrote in, as a student of prepared protection and situational awareness, at what point does information overload act as a deterrent to my training? I use PDN as a distance learning site as well as other sources, Grant Cunningham, ASP, etc. Sometimes there's so much information it can appear overwhelming. Rob, you want to take a swing at this one?
Yeah, absolutely. There is a lot of information out there, and it can be overwhelming. I think vetting your sources, and sort of selecting a few choice people that you're going to follow, people that resonate with you, people that you understand kind of what their rationale is. If you watch the video that I put up maybe a few hours ago, teasing tonight's Q&A with Mike, it was Mike and I talking about 5 years ago about our approaches to training and some things that we had collaborated on, and he was taking over the gun guy role at Best Defense. And one of the things that he stressed, and that I've always stressed as well, and one of the reasons I think we get along, even though we do teach some things differently, is the importance of the why question, the importance of understanding why your instructor is sharing what he's sharing, why he's teaching what he's teaching. And I think I'm always very ready to admit that I may be wrong. I may change my mind, and I have changed my mind a lot, but I also am very ready to explain why. And one of the key factors for me in selecting contributors to the Personal Defense Network is, can they explain why? And if instructor comes along and disagrees with me, it's almost really welcome to Personal Defense Network. Good. Like, if this guy can explain what he's doing, he might change my mind. He's certainly going to give our students, our members, our watchers, our audience more to think about, as long as he can explain why. So when you're vetting an instructor, if they're explaining why and not just showing you something or saying, here's another way, here's another way, here's another way, that might be a way to for you to weed out a lot of the noise from the information today. It's on the internet. Mike, how do you select or deselect?
No, I agree completely with that. But I'll tell you that from the person that asked the question standpoint, I completely agree. I say that literally because I find myself sucked into YouTube at points in time, or wherever else on Facebook, and it drives me insane because before I know it, I'm sucked into 3 or 4 different videos. And I'm biased, of course, but as a professional trainer, about half of what I see is complete and utter crap. And it scares me, the things that some of my students come to class and tell me, hey, I learned this from so-and-so, and what do you think about this? And it's absolute utter crap. But I would say that I agree with Rob. The why question, we discussed that in that video. That's one of my things. That's some of the things that's something I've always done with my instructors. I said, hey, you better be able to describe the why. And when you teach a technique in class, we should always be talking about the what, the why, and the how. And if the why is not included, you're going to lose a student. So for those of you listening and watching this, I agree completely with what Rob said too. Select a few sources. I'm thinking we're in a day and age that has so much information. You're better off selecting a few, or 1 or 2, let's say, masters. And I'm not saying not to train with a lot of different people, but select 2 or 3 based on a lot of research and some student research that you trust, and learn what they have to offer, and then move on to something else. And be very, very wary of getting distracted on the YouTube and the Facebook and some of these social media things that are out there. And I know I promote myself, Rob does, we all do that, but boy, there's so much time you could be using to do something effective. I literally found myself this week saying, I'm done in front of the computer, I'm done on YouTube and Facebook, I'm going to spend all kinds of time developing skills over the next 3 or 4 weeks. Just get heavy duty on the gun, striking, punching, cutting, whatever. And make sure you spend your time doing something useful. Was that the question?
Yes. So, Mike, Andre asks, how much of training should be within the 7 to 12 yard target range?
How much of what kind of training? Like long-distance training for deployment to Afghanistan, or self-defense in my home? And I think that's the first question that I would ask him is, what are you training for? And until we identify, hey, what we're training for, we can't really identify what we should be doing. But let's assume that he's asking, and he's probably maybe a civilian law enforcement officer or whatever that carries and is looking at defensive use, because that's what this particular segment is about. 7 to 12 yards, in my mind, in the past, would have been a distance that I would have said, well, that's a little outside of a lot of self-defense shootings. But if you look at what Tom Gibbons has found and a lot of the research, we can kind of correlate and look at two different segments of people that get in gunfights. Law enforcement officers that are uniformed tend to get in gunfights at very close ranges, and the reason for that is because they're dealing with people at very close ranges. Civilians and people that wear civilian clothing, for example, undercover FBI, undercover DEA civilians tend to, believe it or not, get in gunfights at a little bit farther ranges, more than 5 yards, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 yards away, 10 probably being a farther distance. So if you look at where those fights are happening, and this in my mind has changed after talking to a few people and doing the research, I would certainly focus as a civilian that's not going to get into trouble a good deal of my training at the 4 to 8 yard distance. I'm going to master the manipulation skills and getting the handgun in the fight and doing the movement skills, using cover, all these things. And then as I have more time, now I want to also learn the closer ranges and the farther ranges. And here's my final answer for that individual. I tend to not like to answer student questions. Say, hey, Mike, what should I spend the majority of my time training and doing? And I'll say, well, why not train everything? Now I say, yeah, focus the majority of your time on the things you're going to do the most. But if you don't get very good at everything, all of the ranges, the 3 yard range, the 1 yard range, and the 14 yard range, literally, and this is kind of blunt, who are you fooling? Because you spent an hour a night on Xbox or watching some sitcom TV show or doing all these other things where literally I've developed my skills in 15 minutes a day dry fire and a couple trips to the range live fire. So there's no reason why you can't be very, very good at all of these different ranges. And that's what I would ask. I would tell that person, hey, in other words, instead of finding an excuse to train at certain ranges because you think you might be in a fight there, find an excuse to train all of the skill sets that you possibly can.
Very good. So Al writes, and this is a question for both of you to kind of discuss this subject a little bit. So Rob, I've heard you say that you don't see a great deal of value in dry fire exercise because you can't tell if you're really hitting the target. On the other hand, Mike in his books and DVDs seems to place a great deal of importance on it. Rob, what do you think?
For me, I think that a lot of people say dry fire, but they mean practice in their home with their guns in a defensive context. So dry fire, literally trying to develop marksmanship skills and recoil management skills at the level that most of the students that I would say are the average PDN member, the average combat focus shooting student, the average patrol officer, I don't think they're gaining a lot by spending an inordinate amount of time literally pulling the trigger on their gun and watching their sight alignment sight picture. What I grew up knowing as live fire, what was advocated ad nauseum when I was coming up and developing my skills in the 80s and the 90s. So that's what I think is overplayed, or at least was overplayed in the past. Today, if we're talking about dry presentations from the holster in unorthodox positions that you can practicing right now sitting in a chair, practicing any of your transitions from unarmed to armed skills, things like that, you can train in an environment when you're off the range in a variety of ways for personal defense that may or may not have anything to do with firearms. I think that there are manipulations, and like I said, especially presentation from the holster in a variety of different circumstances and conditions, one-handed, weak-handed, different types of clothing. If you use different carry positions, then you make sure you cover all the bases on those. I think those are the best uses of your time off the range, because on the range is really where you need to be seeing what's happening with recoil management. You need to be recognizing slide lock to get the stimulus so that you can tie that to your reload performance or your malfunction drill performance, all of those things. So that's the kind of fine-tuning nuance of my denigration of dry fire traditionally and emphasis on live fire for the shooting skills. And of course you can get in somewhere in the middle using something like a pistol that Mike had, using any kind of a laser training device. You can start to get more feedback. Even in airsoft in your house, you can start to get more feedback. But the further away you are from the actual use of your gun on the range, I think you could almost be building bad habits in, and that's one of the dangers of the dry fire environment. Mike?
Yeah, I don't, it would seem, you might, if you don't know us well, you might think that Rob and I disagree on this one. I don't entirely, and I do place a high value in dry firing when I'm training, when my students are training, stuff like that. Number one, let's separate the two areas. The competitive shooters, we have so many physical movement skills we have to refine to a high degree. We have to dry fire, or at least unless you have enough money, you can afford that much live fire. And there's a point where there's a diminishing return where literally you're physically so beat up from shooting so much, you're probably better off dry firing. Separate that into the defensive side, though. Pulling the gun out of the holster from concealment is something we can train ad nauseum at home in dry fire and develop that skill. But we can't develop everything with dry fire. And I'll give you another thing here. World champion shooter Eric Rafael. He's a 10-time world champion. He's probably the best shooter in the world and that has ever been, except for maybe my friend Rob Latham. Advocates no more than 10 minutes a day dry fire at most. And he's a competitive shooter that needs to develop these physical skills. So I don't disagree with Rob entirely on that aspect. And the reason for that is beyond about 10 minutes, most humans, unless you use a part-time game, and some of the things that I've written about in my book, will lose focus. And dry firing without focus, meaning absolutely paying attention to where the gun is pointed, by recognition of the sight picture or laser or whatever you're using, is probably, like Rob said, a worse habit than dry firing, ad nauseum, because you're still teaching yourself to point the gun in the wrong direction. But there are so many other things you could do without live fire. And I'm, like I said, I'm a proponent of this gun. They don't sponsor me. He did give me this particular one, but the point is, it teaches me to learn how to pull the trigger on a handgun without moving it, and I get some visual feedback. So things like this, Rob mentioned airsoft. I do a lot of punching, strike dummy, striking, building close range positions with red guns or shirt guns, and it gives me a dry firing, but it gives me the feedback of where I'm hitting my strike dummy as I'm throwing those strikes and integrating, and Rob mentioned that. So I think that we actually agree on most of what we said there, though. But I'm gonna disagree just to disagree with him anyways.
So we got a live question in via YouTube for Mike. Chris says, as weapon manipulation is predominantly being taught in classes, what do you recommend for citizens to learn proper tactics to best implement the aforementioned?
Well, that was a long one. So when we're teaching manipulations, what do I advocate for? Can you give me the last part of that one more time, please?
What do you recommend for citizens to learn proper tactics to best implement the aforementioned? Weapon manipulation, predominantly being taught in classes.
Here's the deal. Not for civilians, defensive shooters. The first thing we need to identify is what manipulations we think are proper and correct. For example, are we going to use the slide release or slide lock on the gun? Call it whatever you want, or are we going to manipulate the slide with gross motor skills? I'm a big believer in figuring out what you believe to be the most efficient way to manipulate your firearm in a consistent manner. And I think ICE stands for something like that, right, Rob? So we're talking the same thing here. Consistency, efficiency. And we're speaking the same language there. Once we've determined the right techniques, the techniques that will be valuable to us, then we need to start to employ them in the environment we just mentioned in the last question, whether that's dry fire where I'm learning to get the stimulus of the click and response, on the live fire, dry fire range. And then the key there is to try to apply those training drills in as close to the environment with the actual carry gun and the actual carry holster and the concealment method that we're going to utilize in the real deal. And that's one of the things that I find with students that show up in some classes. They'll show up and say, hey, Mike, can I use this handgun for the class, or should I shoot this handgun, and which holster should I bring? And my answer is always, which one did you carry to the range today? That's what you should be training with, and that's what you should be training your manipulation skills to ingrain those, I guess, as we worded in the question, tactics, although that's a different word in entirely situations. Did I answer that question?
I think you did. So Rob just asks, I'm a PDN subscriber and was curious about your opinion related to plus P ammunition for self-defense. I use high-quality defensive ammunition in my handguns, but only standard pressure loads. My reasoning is that I shoot thousands of practice rounds each year, and if I encounter a self-defense situation, I don't want to be surprised by higher pressure ammunition that I would only be able to practice with occasionally. For the record, Jeff does practice routinely with self-defense loads that he carries. In your opinion, Rob, is he missing something important by foregoing the plus P rounds in handgun calibers intended for self-defense?
For a number of years, I accidentally carried plus P rounds. And I don't mean accidentally like I didn't know. I mean accidentally like I was carrying the Winchester PDX-1 Defender, now it's just known as the Defender round, which is a plus P round, 147 grain round. If they had offered that exact same round in a non-plus P that offered exactly the same performance, I would have carried that. And in fact, now what I'm carrying is the Winchester W round, the D for Defend, the hollow point round, because it achieves that amount of performance that I'm looking for with the gel test through intermediate barriers, including heavy clothing, at a lower recoil, at a lower pressure, at a lower felt recoil, which means I can shoot faster. So obviously, I think if anyone has found a bullet that they trust, I don't think they should care what the pressure is. If they trust that, then great. What they should be searching for is the lowest amount of pressure, the lowest impulse from a recoil that still meets whatever they've set as their standard, right? And for me, that's going to be that 12 to 15 inches of penetration with good expansion and good weight retention through heavy clothing in that 10% gelatin. If we can find that from our carry gun, then we've got a good round. And once we've found that, then maybe we keep looking a little bit, out of our peripheral vision, so to speak. We're looking for another round that might offer the same kind of performance at a lower recoil impulse so that we can shoot faster. So I wouldn't say just for the sake of plus P, you look for plus P. Make sure the round you're carrying is a round you trust, and always be looking for one that's lower pressure. Mike, your thoughts on that?
No, I completely agree. As far as practicing, we encountered a lot in believe it or not, shooting matches, and this is an answer that kind of is in the same area. And here's the answer there is, oftentimes a lot of these competitors will load up a round that they feel is the softest possible, because in a match it's important to shoot very, very fast and very, very accurately. But what I found across the board, to include myself, is in those matches you could load pretty much whatever you wanted to under just a little bit of stress and adrenaline. It's going to be much less than an actual gunfight. I can't really tell the difference. So I would tell people that, look for, take them side by side. Find practice ammo that's as cheap as you can possibly get, that's high quality. And the reason I say that is because I want my people to shoot as much as they possibly can, and then shoot it side by side with your carry ammo that obviously recoils as little as possible, because that means you can shoot faster and more accurately in a defensive situation, and then make sure they both shoot accurately out of your gun, and you've got a great solution.
Very good. So, Mike, we're going to jump back to more distance questions. We got one via YouTube Live from James. Since most defensive shooting situations happen at close ranges, what do you feel is the farthest distance a person should be proficient with a concealed carry handgun? How often should someone train at these further distances?
So, the last two parts of that, what's the farthest distance they should be proficient with? And once in the last part of the question.
How often should someone train at these further distances?
I think people should be proficient out to 50 yards. I know that's like, oh, what are you talking about? We don't ever get in gun. Well, here's the deal. I mean, do you want to be that guy or gal on that day in the mall parking lot or the Walmart parking lot when a guy comes out with a shotgun and he shoots person number one, person number two, and he's about to shoot the 3-year-old sitting there scared to death because mommy or daddy's dead, and you can't get that hit? In other words, once again, I'll default to let's figure out a way to learn all distance. But if I have to answer the question, once again, I'm going to look at their mission, their job, the person that we're talking to that's asking the question. If you're a uniformed law enforcement officer that deals in one-step distance with people all the time, you better be really good at your combatives and some other skills and engage into that distance. The average civilian, though, concealed carry holder, we should probably be working on that 4 to 8 yard distance primarily, but you should any day of the week be able to put a headshot at 10 yards and maybe challenge yourself and be able to hit something at at 15 yards. And if you can't, then you need to address your training and spend less money on something else.
Very good.
I know that's the hardcore answer, but
that's all right. Rob, we got another live YouTube question from Joel. What drills would you recommend for home defense situations?
Yes. I think it's close to what Mike just had said, and what he said on both of those distance questions is you should try to be really well-rounded and be ready to deal with any kind of situation that is plausible. We use the plausibility principle to determine how to expend our resources, right? We I agree with Mike, but I recognize that everyone's training resources are limited to include interest and justification, right? The guy who's getting ready to go to deploy overseas with a special operations unit doesn't have any excuse not to be training, 5 to 7 days a week. The guy that is the, local dentist that has good skill sets and an active business and an active family, and he's active in his community, he may not be able to justify training more than once a month once he's developed his skills. So the expenditure of resources around home defense, really first and foremost, once you've covered that, what's the furthest plausible distance you're going to shoot inside of your house? Unless you've got a really huge house with huge bedrooms and long hallways, I would tell most people if you're training out to 5 to 7 yards, you're probably covering the most plausible distances. Now, as Mike said, do you carry the gun occasionally to the range in your truck, and could you be that person who gets caught in the active rampage killer situation and have an opportunity to shoot at 25, 30, 40, 50 yards? Absolutely. We were shooting in our advanced pistol handling class on Sunday out to about 75 yards, but that's the 4th day of formal training. In our CFS class, which is really the primary class people take, days 1 and 2 for home defense and concealed carry, we never go beyond 20 yards. So the main thing to do is to look at the context of the application of that relatively close quarters defensive shooting. Are you doing a lot of one-handed shooting because you might be pushing somebody away from you and then getting to your gun? Are you doing one-handed shooting because you might be holding a family member back? Right? Are you using a flashlight inside your home? Are you accessing, are you planning and practicing on how you're going to access that defensive firearm in your home that you're not carrying, but that you're actually staging, maybe in a quick access safe like I usually recommend? So, take your gun vault to the range and run a drill where someone has you, pick up a fake phone, start the call to 911, discuss the things that you plan on saying with the 911 operator while you're opening the safe, whatever you have to do to get your gun ready, which may just be put it in your hand, it may be insert a magazine, rack the slide, whatever it is, and then stand there in your ready position, wait for a command to fire, and based on that stimulus, maybe from multiple targets that are 3 to 5 yards, or maybe 15 feet from you, maybe 12 feet from you, 10 feet from you, based on your bedroom size, your most plausible defensive position. That's the drill that we run in our home defense classes. So our defensive firearms coaches certified through IC training run that kind of a drill at the end of every class. Get on the phone, get to your quick access safe, get your family behind you, and on the appropriate stimulus, engage the threat. And we're training everything from one-handed shooting skills to also remembering that you don't need to hold the phone and shouldn't be holding the phone while you're shooting somebody, right? Learning to drop the phone, learning to let go of it. When I was going through law enforcement training, we would train to let go of the proverbial ticket book or the identification or whatever we might have held in our hand when it came time to start fighting. Because we know as human animals we tend to clamp down on something under stress that's in our hand. So we have to learn to let go of that phone. So there's a lot of little nuances that go along with home defense that aren't always integrated. We cover a lot of that. Again, I'm going to keep sending people back to personaldefensenetwork.com because there's some great videos on these topics, all the topics that we've talked about, including that long-distance shooting. We even have a DVD that we did with Chris Collins, who's a friend of Mike's, also another PDN contributor. He and I did a set of drills and a set of skill development sets on a DVD years ago for PDN for extreme distance shooting. So there's a lot of information out there for people looking for information on any of these topics.
Very good. For those of you that are just tuning in, this is the 3rd episode of PDN Live. Our topic tonight is self-defense firearms training and practice. We've got Rob Pincus, the Executive Director of Personal Defense Network, and our special guest, Mike Sieklander, owner of Shooting Performance. If you've got any questions, go ahead and put them in the comment section below, also via Twitter. For those of you that are liking what you're listening to, we have an awesome deal for the PDN Premium membership. It's right below there in the YouTube video description. So Mike, we've got a question that was written in. Do you have any thoughts on the quality of front sight Nevada training?
I have across the board in my teaching career, I have been very, very careful not to publicly say, hey, this is a really great school or this is a really crappy school. More importantly, no matter what opinion I might have generated based on what I've heard, unless I've actually attended the school itself, I'll typically default to no comment. I will tell you, I worked with a guy that worked as the range master of Front Sight a long time ago, and shot with him, and he had a completely different shooting style than I did, and a completely different thought process. But he was a good shooter and probably a good instructor. He was a good communicator from that place. But like I said, I have not attended. I've not taken a course, and even if I had, I tend not to say anything negative about any entity that I've heard about or any instructor publicly.
Got it. Rob, do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm not as politically correct as Mike is sometimes. I have trained out there years ago out at Front Sight, and I've hired a couple of people. One of whom was the #2 instructor there. He came to work for me out at the Valhalla Training Center. And I think I'll echo what Mike said. There's a very different mindset from what I teach and what everyone I think associated with Personal Defense Network teaches. I consider it an antiquated approach. They're very good instructors. They're very good communicators. They run great ranges. There's some beautiful ranges out there. But I do think people are learning an older approach to defensive firearms training, and they're very, very strict about it as well. I've known a lot of their instructors over the years, many instructors who've gone there and kind of gotten burned out on, according to their testimony, on the idea that there isn't a lot of evolution, there isn't a lot of progress, there's a lot of critical thinking going on with the doctrine. The doctrine is what it is. They're very good at teaching it. They're very thorough instructors. I think people would be safe there, and they would get something out of it, but it's not what I recommend in terms of training in 2015 for personal defense firearms.
Got it. So Rob, we got a question from Todd about priorities when selecting a carry location. In Todd's case, appendix works well for his daily schedule and dress, but because he's thin, he has a hard time concealing a G19 or larger G26 and J-frame, no problem. On the other hand, if he carries at 435, he can basically use the same position for any one of his pistols, whether carrying concealed or outside the waistband at the range, with a full-size gun. Any recommendations on how you'd approach this choice from a training perspective? Seems there's a little compromise either way, with either the speed of draw with appendix versus flexibility at 435. He'd like to be as efficient with his training time as possible.
Was that for me first?
Yeah.
Okay. So, I would say that consistency is incredibly important. As Mike alluded to, it's the centerpiece of ICE Training Company: integrity, consistency, and efficiency. Because consistency is such a huge contributor to efficiency, right? The more often you can train one technique, the more often you could just carry one gun, the better off you are. Now, I spend a lot of my time in Colorado. I spend a lot of my time down here in Florida. I spend a lot of my time traveling at other places. There are certainly times when I could carry a full-size double-stack gun and be quote-unquote better prepared, better armed for a worst-case scenario. But all the time, every time, I can carry my crossbreed appendix holster. I can carry a single-stack XDS 9mm, and that's going to fit, right? So that gun has become my default go-to gun and my default go-to location, because whether I'm sitting in the car driving for 5 or 6 hours, or I'm going to the mall, or I'm wearing a pullover, or I'm wearing an unbuttoned polo shirt, an untucked polo shirt, or an unbuttoned pullover shirt type thing that opens in the front over a t-shirt that's untucked. It's very easy for me to carry that single stack gun in that position. Prior to that, I was carrying what I called a Glock 26L, which was simply a Glock 19 size gun cut down to a 26 size grip. So it was the same length slide as the 19, but it had the grip size of the 26, because I'm also on the scrawnier side, so it's harder for me to carry a full-size gun in any position, whether it was 4 o'clock or appendix. And honestly, over the years, I've decided that I think a lot of people think they can carry a bigger gun than they actually can at 4 o'clock, because it's not as obvious to them that they're printing. So maybe the gun that they're carrying at appendix is actually the right size gun for them. So I would encourage a shooter. It was one of my students to pick one gun that they can carry, 99% of the time in a place they can carry 99% of the time, and stick with that.
Very good. So, Mike, I got another distance question for you. I'm letting you handle all these tonight.
Okay.
Preston via YouTube asked, do you think it is worthwhile to practice shooting at the 25-yard range under low light conditions, where the target silhouette is poorly illuminated?
No. The context of that in itself. Number one, poorly illuminated. Anytime something is poorly illuminated, we shouldn't be training ourselves to shoot at it. And I've also had the argument come back at me when I've made that statement that, well, if they're shooting at you, you know you could shoot back. Well, baloney. How do you know it's not your partner or your family member that happened to arm themselves as well? So no, training in low light conditions to shoot at a poorly illuminated target, absolutely not. Once again, context means everything. There could be a SWAT officer or a patrol officer that deploys a patrol rifle that needs to shoot at 25 yards at a target, but it hopefully would not be poorly illuminated if they had a good weapon-mounted light and they paid some attention to their lighting systems and they trained with it. As far as, once again, training at 25 yards, sure, take all the time in the world if you have that training time to learn to shoot at different ranges. But in in that specific context, let's say that'd be something we could probably avoid in training.
Got it. Rob, any thoughts on that?
I agree. I think and if the intention of this student was, should we be training and maybe even carrying a light that will illuminate someone at 25 yards, should we be training to be able to do that, to identify a threat at 25 yards? I think the call for that would be incredibly limited in a personal defense capacity. Maybe law enforcement, again, searching for somebody, obviously in a military environment, but training to find a threat at 25 yards is not something we're teaching at Personal Defense Network. If you're 25 yards away from the bad guy in the dark, good.
Yeah, that's right.
So shifting gears to targets, Rob, Ron asked, where do you get your targets with the multiple geometrics colors in addition to the silhouette?
For years, we used a target called the SEB target, and that target was provided primarily through Law Enforcement Target Company. And finally, one of our instructors, I said I was going to do it for years, we finally had enough pressure and enough of sort of initiative by our instructor group to say, hey, seriously, here's a napkin, here's a pen, draw the damn target you want, and let's see if we can really get a target that fits exactly what you're doing and see if that's what we're all doing. And Law Enforcement Target Company was good enough to back that project and give us a great deal on preparing that target. So today, the Balance of Speed and Precision target is available through Law Enforcement Target Company. We also sell them at icestore.us, but honestly, we don't make a lot of money on it, and in fact, we try not to make much money at all. I think that target is so good and so useful, and one of the cool things about it, a lot of people don't realize till they start using it, is you get to use the whole piece of paper, which it's not about really as much saving money as just convenience and efficiency at the range. So especially if you're at that traditional range where a ceasefire has to be called for everybody to go down and change their targets, it's great to be able to use the whole thing instead of just the center of a B-27 or a Q target. So that target is available all over the place, and apparently it's a really good seller for Law Enforcement Target Company. A lot of people that have nothing to do with ICE Training Company or the Combat Focused Shooting Program use it. So that's where I send people.
Got it. So Rob, again, I have another question for you that came in via email from Stephen. Having completed the counter-ambush course last week successfully, there is one question remaining on my mind. It concerns a topic about intuitive instinct reactions and responses. Would it be possible for you to shed some light on this, because the way the question was set up on the test, it got me all confused again.
Okay. Okay, so is that it? Just talk about that?
Yeah, talk about that.
Okay, so the question is, the book Counter Ambush came out in 2012, and along with that, we launched a home study course. Actually, the first distance education project I did. It was in conjunction with USCCA, and earlier Mike had mentioned the research from Tom Givens and the data he has on defensive shooting distances and things like that. And a lot of that kind of research, Tom allowed me to look at that research, and actually we even kind of refined it a little bit so that we could look at those percentages of what distances we should train at a little bit harder. And we looked at other things like expenditure of training resources. There's a lot of neuroscience, there's a lot of physiology, a lot of anatomy that goes into the Counter Ambush book and the Counter Ambush home study course. So I used to use the words instinctive and intuitive interchangeably. And honestly, I didn't even use the word intuitively, let's say 15 years ago. I was just misusing the word instinctive. And today I draw some really clear distinctions about it, and including the coursework in the Counter Ambush book and the Counter Ambush home study course, we make some very clear distinctions. Basically, instinctive things are naturally occurring reactions to stimuli. They're things that we do automatically, and automatically being the right word, reflexively would be another word I would use, and they're naturally occurring. And they're really beyond our control. They just happen. The level at which they happen, we talk about natural reactions to being startled or fear or that suddenly introduced stimulus. The level at which they happen, we can't really predict, right? Some people are going to be startled by certain levels of noise or flashes of light or proximity. Other people are going to be less sensitive or more sensitive. So we're not really worried about the level at which these reactions kick in. We're just worried about the fact that they are naturally occurring instinctive reactions. An intuitive thing is something that we characterize as a response. So intuitive things happen on a timeline basis after an initial natural reaction, and something that's intuitive is either improvised or learned. It's something that occurs naturally. We say that intuitive things work well with what the body does naturally, work well with the mechanics of our brain, work well with our joints and our structures, because they can occur naturally, but they occur naturally only as improvisation, specific to the context, specific to the stimuli being introduced. What we really worry about in a training context, in a skill development context, is that we are choosing learned techniques that are intuitive, that work well with what the body does naturally in the context of intended use. So earlier, Mike talked about the difference between using the slide stop, slide release button and using the overhand method to put a gun back into battery at the end of a reload. Well, we teach the overhand method of racking because we find it to be more intuitive. It's more naturally occurring. It relies on the grosser motor skill of grabbing the top of the slide, pulling and releasing, and it also works better with the mechanics of the gun. It's more intuitive for the gun because should the gun have the slide forward when we insert that fresh magazine, well, now the slide stop isn't even going to help us. So if we had just cleared a malfunction, for example, we insert the magazine, roll our hand over, and work the slide. So we choose that as the more intuitive response to the stimulus of having just inserted the magazine. So I think that's probably the biggest distinction, is instinctive things are natural reactions that we want to integrate into our training because we can predict that they're going to happen under certain circumstances, and intuitive is the way we describe our preferred methodology to include our preferred training methodology. We want to teach and learn and practice in ways that work well with the way the brain records information and retains information, and the way our brain and muscles and obviously the nervous system work together to perform skills and retain them.
Got it. So we're kind of getting to the top of the hour. Mike, I got one last question for you. You may have already covered this in a couple of other questions, but what's your opinion on the shot indicating resetting trigger and best use in training?
Shot indicating resetting trigger.
Mm-hmm. CERT.
Is that what that actually stands for?
That's what it stands for.
Shooting thing. I've had this for that long, and I just figured out what that stands for.
Yep.
I'm a huge fan of the CERT, and like I said, let me define that. If you didn't catch this earlier question asker, I'm not sponsored by him. I know Mike Hughes personally. He's my buddy. He sends me these to test them, the new ones, the lighter ones, whatever. And the reason I am a fan is because it's really important for me to be able to work on things and get some both visual feedback from the sights and what the handgun is doing, as well as to see what's actually happening on the target in my house. And what I mean by that from a defensive context is I discussed it earlier. I spent a lot of time practicing close range, striking and shooting, and then maybe parrying off. And I have a big strike dummy that kind of looks like Rob, actually, me or Rob. Big baller. Hey, and sorry, Rob. But practice, striking and shooting, and that laser indicator actually allows me to see exactly where I'm hitting. I also use it as an instructor. They have a model, of course, where you can, prep or take the slack out of the trigger. And it has a dot indicator that's one color, and when you press the trigger, that has a dot indicator that's another color. So it's an easy way to describe some of those mechanics behind the trigger press or manipulation itself. So I'm a big fan. Don't tell Mike Hughes. I've been punching things and hitting things with these guns for a long time. They're not designed to do that. So if you're watching this thinking, oh, I can do that, and it's made as a strike gun, I'm literally talking. I beat these things up really badly, and they last, which says something about the quality. But they're good guns, and I use them also in my competitive training with some of my students because it allows us to really see exactly what the dot does, which is what's projecting down the barrel as we're entering positions and doing different things. So they're neat. They're neat tools. We'd actually just use one on the best defense in kind of a force-on-force, play it out in the driveway kind of situation that Mike Janish and I talked about. Hey, how you can do some really simple training without going live fire or owning, investing in airsoft or UTM or FX or whatever else that requires safety equipment.
Awesome. Well, guys, I think that will wrap up the questions for the night. We had a lot of awesome questions that came in via email, via YouTube, via Twitter. If you didn't get your question answered, stick around. Rob will stay on and answer questions in the comments section. If you like what you're hearing, we have an awesome deal for our PDN Premium membership. It's right here in the YouTube video description. Click on it. Go to it. Awesome content. You can find us on Facebook at Personal Defense Network, Twitter, P_D_N, Instagram at PD Network. Next month's topic will be on April 29th, and it's medical and fitness as it relates to personal defense. If you've got any questions for that, go ahead and email it to us, social@personaldefensenetwork.com, or hit us up on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. You can also follow the action on this from tonight using PDN Live hashtag. Mike, where can we find you on social media?
Shooting-performance.com. I would give you social media. You can search for my name, but if you go to my website, it's got neat little things that you can click on to take you to Facebook or my blog, where I've got a bunch of free articles, I think good content, podcasts, whatever else I have out there. So that's probably the best central source. Just go to my website, and you can probably find whatever you need there, and that's easy to remember. And the dash is a hyphen. I don't know why I did that when I did the website, but shooting-performance.com.
Awesome. And then, Rob, you want to tell us a little bit about the tour before we wrap this show up, and what you've got going on and what you have in the pipeline?
Yes, I've got a couple more classes down here in Florida, and then I'm going up to Georgia. I'll be teaching in Woodbury next week, I think, or no, just that's right after Easter weekend. So that's the 6th and 7th, I think. And then straight up to Nashville for the Nra Convention, the annual Nra meetings and exhibits in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm going to be there speaking 4 times. I'm speaking twice on Friday, I'm speaking on Saturday, I'm speaking on Sunday, and we'll have a bunch of our combat-focused shooting instructors there. And then the tour continues up through the Mid-Atlantic, up to New England, out through the Midwest, over the mountains, across the plains, over the mountains, and then back where you are in the Pacific Northwest, finishing. The last class of the tour is actually going to be out at Mike Hughes' range, the developer of the SIRT pistol that we were just talking about. So I'll be out there. It's an annual stop for me. It's always great to get out there with those guys and really just kind of trade ideas and do some training. And we do a lot of great stuff with the SIRT pistol as well as live fire stuff. Personal Defense Network Training.com obviously is the place that we want to send people for all the training information. The calendar is also there under the training tab, as is information about our tour sponsors. All of our tour sponsors are here on our tour chip that all of our students get that participate in classes. If you have any questions about them, you can always post that at my Facebook, which is Rob Pincus Pro, and then I also have a personal Facebook page. It's always filled up, kind of like Mike's is, but if you go to Rob Pincus Pro and give that a like, or go to the ICE Training Discussion Group, that's a great place to ask questions as well. And tonight, this is also the first time that we're streaming also on Meerkat. So Meerkat, I'll give you a look at the coin there too. I've got the Meerkat guys here on the iPhone 6. So Meerkat's kind of cool. We've been doing some live feeds from our classes from the PDN tour at my Twitter feed, which is @PincusRob.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, guys, for joining us tonight. Topic was self-defense firearms training and practice. Join us next month for medical and fitness as it relates to personal defense. Rob, Mike, any last parting thoughts before we end for the night and move into the YouTube chat?
No, I think it's great. And Mike, if you can join in, even if you can't get there tonight, Mike, maybe you can check in the next day or two at some of the questions people are going to ask at the YouTube channel at Personal Defense Net. Shannon, great job. This is your first night moderating. I think you're going to stick with us for a while, maybe at least. And looking forward to Caleb joining us next month. And then if people have ideas about topics they'd like us to cover or specific contributors that they know are part of Personal Defense Network, if you go to personaldefensenetwork.com and look down at the bottom of any of the web pages, click on the About Us, look at our list of active contributors, and tell me if there's somebody in particular you'd like to talk to or a topic that you'd like to cover for our next live chat, because we have not yet picked the topics for a bunch of the year to come. So let us know what you think. We always like the feedback. This is now our 3rd one. I'm really excited about it. Mike, I really appreciate you joining. Obviously, I value your friendship, value your contributions to Personal Defense Network and to the industry as a whole. The things you guys, the team there at the Best Defense, are really appreciated, and Shooting Performance is one of the few companies that I, without hesitation, recommend to anybody looking for personal defense firearms training, and there's a lot of companies out there, and I really appreciate what you do, dude.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me. To the listeners, viewers, thanks for watching. And Rob, I will jump on there, help with questions, and of course, people, you can reach out to me directly. My email address is on the website as well, so don't hesitate to ask, and I will answer as quickly as I get to my promise. I'll leave you, from me, one last thing. Find an excuse to train versus an excuse not to train. That's the one thing I want you to think about.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks. Take care.